Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Don't Risk It podcast presented by VFIS Client Risk Solutions. This program focuses on the exposures our clients frequently encounter and discusses the potential solutions to help reduce these exposures. I'm your host, Chris Rodgers with VFIS Client Risk Solutions, and today we're discussing peer support in emergency services. I want to welcome Jimmy Fannin back to the program. Jimmy is joining us again today to offer some suggestions on providing peer support to your department members. Jimmy, thank you for joining me today. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.
So as the demand for emergency services increases, do we see a rise in job-related stress, including PTSD?
We do see a rise in job-related stress, especially in emergency services. The rise in PTSD isn't measured the same as job-related stress. However, it is definitely relatable to incident stress and first responders.
So as we spoke the last time that we were together, we talked about the passion that you have for first responders, and within that, the importance you see in emergency service chaplains. We also spoke about studies that have shown peer support being a great way to avoid PTSD. Do you feel that peer support within emergency service organizations is important?
I do. Studies have shown, like we talked about before, over the last decade or so, that peer support is really where the magic happens. By what I mean by when I say the magic happens is when the first responder, whether it's an officer, a fireman, or an EMS provider, can have time with someone who knows the job, related to maybe even a specific incident that their peer was on or was part of. The reduction in PTSD presentations is very high. Some agencies have actually now hired, or at least put people in place that they have already hired to lead peer support charges just for that reason, to be trained and recognized in presentations of pre-PTSD and stress management and incident stress to help first responders manage that without incurring full-blown PTSD.
So it almost sounds like that you when you hear peer support, it almost sounds like an informal program where, you go and talk to a coworker, but it sounds like that some agencies have formalized that process by developing committees or kind of, is that the road that it's going down?
Here in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, one of the largest police agencies in the county has actually created almost like a division, 3 command staff officers who their job or what their mission is really to help their units be better at taking care of one another.
Jimmy, so one of the things I think is important to kind of preface is we're finally starting to allow people to talk about PTSD in the emergency services. For so many years, 20 years that I've been doing it, it was always a shame, don't talk about that. We're finally starting to really break out about it and really dive into the fact that it exists and it's there. I think from my perspective, I think that peer support is probably going to be the more beneficial route versus, more that formalized process. I think, what's your take on that? Do we see more people that want to jump into this peer support concept?
Well, I think as individuals, just as human beings, we're quicker to be more vulnerable, more open, more honest with folks that we know, that we're close to, and especially folks that know what we're dealing with. So if I'm going to use EMS because typically and nowadays, other than command staff, other than supervisors, EMS are riding with partners, a medic and an EMT or 2 EMTs, whatever that looks like for certain agencies. So they have time after a call. They're prepping their rig for the next call. They're moving on. Let's just say they're leaving a hospital, heading back into their district for the next call. They can basically together just talk through that call. I do think exactly what you said, I'm going to use the word stigma, the stigma of it's weak to have issues with these critical incidents. I think that's gone away. And I say gone away. There might be some, but it's moving different. And I think some of that is because we're watching colleagues, friends, peers deal with this in a way it puts them off the job. Like a passion of mine is to see first responders love the job. I love what I get to do. I don't like the circumstance, but I love to help folks keep moving forward, especially if they're passionate about policing, about providing EMS care, about being a firefighter. I want to see that. And so I think that with increased call volume and decreased staffing, The next call just comes and comes and comes. There's no breaks. There's EMS agencies in Lancaster County that just don't stop. You're on for a shift. You're not stopping. You're going to a call, transporting to a hospital. Sometimes leaving the hospital, literally leaving the hospital. We're leaving now. We'll take that next call that you gave to the other agency. Why? Because there's a need there. The decreased staffing is a problem. And in that, it elevates the level of stress on first responders. Do you know? I mean, I know you've been in a long time. Do you know of police officers that are riding together other than field training? No. It just isn't a thing anymore. So when I can decompress or diffuse my own heart, my own soul, my own mind with someone who knows the job, someone who I ride with maybe on a regular basis, if I'm working on the same shift with the same person over and over again, we know one another. And maybe we don't even get along outside the job, but on the job, that's a person I know I can at least talk with. We were just on the same incident together. I think leadership in general, agency leadership has now begun to buy into the idea that if we don't care for the hearts, the emotions of our folks, we won't have them. The shortage of officers, the shortage of EMS providers, the shortage of firefighters, both paid and volunteer. I mean, there's paid fire companies all around, at least Pennsylvania and local Maryland, Delaware, that are hiring because they're out of staff. And the demand's not getting any less. The demand's actually increasing, but the staffing's decreasing. So definitely, I think many of us are tired of seeing our friends quit the job, or in the worst case scenario, our friends decide that this life on earth is not worth living anymore. Just here in Lancaster County, one agency has dealt with that 5 times in the last 10 years. That's a problem. And that agency is the one that now has 3, staff officers who their goal, their mission is to care for their other officers. I think it's a great program that they're doing. And they're sending them out to be trained in peer support. They're sending them to classes. And when I say classes, like graduate level, week-long classes and this isn't at Penn State, who is really great at this as well. So I definitely think that, like you talked about, how it used to be, just grin and bear it. I think even agency leaders are seeing that we'll run out of staff. We won't have officers. We won't have EMS providers. We won't have firemen if we don't start caring for them emotionally.
To kind of echo that point, do you think there's a generational component to it? Because the older generation, as you heard, was kind of just deal with it, and younger generations are more apt to talk about mental health. Do you think that's helped push this message?
I do. So I'm a 4th generation fireman. All of my fire career has been volunteer, 100%. But my grandfather, my great grandfather were both Philadelphia firemen. And in that sense, I remember sitting down at the table as a 16-year-old junior in Delaware with my grandfather, who was a fireman in the Navy as well. And it was just kind of that thing. I could tell him about it. But I would say even his generation, the generation before them, even more so than now, that they seem like you kind of dealt with it on your own. And whatever way that they coped with it, whatever that was maybe working, and it was just the way they do it. I think, not to take away anything from my grandfather, my uncle, my father, my great-grandfather, from what they dealt with, but I do think that things are different in 2023 here than they were maybe in the 90s, 80s, 70s, going back as far as you want to, just from a stress level. Communities were different. Communities kind of rallied around critical incidents. We don't see that as much anymore. It's hard right now just to simply get folks that might have, let's just use a fire where we've got a family that's been displaced. If they don't have connections close, the shelters, the programs, they're full. And so it's hard to move that. That lays more stress on the responder because, of course, we all want to see those people made whole. If that information is open-ended, if we don't get the opportunity to know that that family we served in that incident has not been able to find a place, they're on the street or however that's bouncing from house to house, that adds stress, I think, to the first responder. First responders do it because they're not, I hope they're not in it for them. I say that because they're, I think there's great pay in the fields. you're not going to become a millionaire. I mean, let's just be honest about it. And that's okay. Obviously, they're passionate about what they're doing, whether it's a passion for serving people or just being in that discipline. So in that sense, if we can help move that passion forward and not, it's going to be not extinguish the fire. That was some pun intended there.
Right?
Yeah, not extinguish the fire in someone's heart to want to serve, to want to keep moving forward in that. The best we can do, at least one of the ways that we can do that well, is through peer support, supporting one another. I do think the stigma, like Bryan talked about, he didn't use that word, but I am, that it's over, or at least it's moving. I think you're right about generationally. My dad is different than I am, than his dad was to him, things like that.
So let's talk about a success story. Have you seen firsthand, without naming names, how peer support has helped with incident stress management and maybe staved off PTSD?
Sure. One of the things, and thinking through this question, it was a very specific incident that I personally was involved in, where command line police officer, so I say command line, high up in the chain of command, just got to a point when I got the phone call from the police chief who was at this officer's house. At the time that the chief guy said, I need help. And when I got there, this officer still had his weapon in his hand. He was kind of ready to be done with life. The nice thing about it is the police chief himself, fairly large, for Lancaster County, fairly large department. The police chief, a lieutenant, and another officer who were all there as well, just wanted to see this guy made whole. That was 2 years ago. And as of right now, not only is that officer still on the job, still loving the job, he has gotten promoted, and now he's another one of the highest ranking officers or in that department, and he's doing well. That, Pierce, I've seen it firsthand, not just there. But that is one that came to my mind right away, because when I stepped into this man's home, his gun was still in his hand. Like, he was ready to be done with life. And thank the Lord that he didn't. Thank the Lord that he had enough sense to at least call someone, which was the police chief. Like, I'm not coming to work today. And as they started talking, the chief just kind of went to the house right away. And that peer support, and he went away to a program for a month. And it's a mental health program, an emotional support program. It's a fantastic place. It's in Maryland. It's, without naming it, I guess, it is the best that I've seen from a resident, like an inpatient type program that has just continued to have success with officers in crisis like that.
So, to kind of round out the conversation, how can we help agencies measure the possible need for peer support among their officers, firefighters, and EMS providers? It's
a tough thing to measure. However, there's a need. In any emergency service agency, there's a need. Whether firefighters or EMS providers or officers are feeling it or saying it, there's a need. They go to critical incidents all the time. Maybe smaller, less busy departments may have less of a need, but they also have less of a staff. But they're measuring it, is evaluating how, I would say from the leadership perspective, how's my team doing? And that the easiest way is just to ask. That's the number one way for leaders, supervisors, command staff individuals to just simply say, how you holding up? And maybe even schedule those times with your providers, with your officers, with your firefighters. Just maybe it's the 15 minutes off once they're on the clock before they get on their rig to go out. Like, come in my office, and maybe schedule that. I don't, but there's certainly, the need typically is only measured when it's too late. And I don't mean that when it's too late that someone commits suicide. That's not what I mean. What I mean is that there's enough stress already inside of someone, inside of a first responder, to already be considering whether it's leaving the job, whether it's abusing drugs or alcohol, or, ultimately the worst possibility, whether it's taking their own life. But in that, measuring that, usually once we see those presentations, it's too late.
Jimmy, I think it's an important aspect to look at, and it's not necessarily 100% relevant to this, but, as people leave organizations, I think that's the importance behind exit interviews. When you do that exit interview, is is this maybe the reason why we're getting out? We're not leaving for that better dollar or the greener pasture. Maybe we're leaving because the stress is too much. And that's a way that an organization can start to measure, is it being effective? Are they having issues amongst the staff? Certainly aspects to look at.
I think that is very pertinent to the conversation we're having right now. I think exit interviews, I mean, I'm going to say this very delicately, like my job before the Chaplains Corps, I pastored. And in moving from one church to another, for whatever circumstance that was, never left a church in let's say, on bad terms. That's just not the case. But only one of those sat me down to say, hey, we, want to talk through what was your experience of the last 10 years. We want to know good and bad. I think if we could do that with first responders, even outside of them going on to another job in a regular way, I know we do in most corporations, companies, we do performance evaluations, and I think they're good. I think sometimes those can be one-sided where, hey, we've seen your progress here through the year. Here's what we need you to work on. Here's what we think you've done well, and here's what we think of for you moving forward. They're good. Please hear me in that. Like, I think they're good evaluators to have. We should be having them. But maybe there's a second, or maybe something part of that evaluation is how, why, what's going on with you. Whether it's, I had a boss for some years that would say, make sure. Now, I oversaw a group of 70 people, and my boss would say, make sure they leave their family stuff at the door before they clock in. And I would say to her, like, you don't. And it's okay. It wasn't an argument. Like, no, we don't. We're human beings. And if I have stress at home, I am definitely bringing that to the job. So if I'm a fireman and I have stress about X, Y, or Z, our son or something, I am bringing that to the job. Why? Because I'm a human being, and I can't just turn it off. I think peer support also has the opportunity to recognize that. There's people trained to see that, hey, Jimmy's not himself today. What's up? And having the courage, it takes courage, right, to go to a peer and say, hey, man, what's going on? Because you're not yourself today. And in that, things can come out that, yeah, maybe it is home stress or job stress that we're having a hard time managing.
One I think that's important is this peer support isn't just for on-the-job stuff. Like you said, we're all humans. We're dealing with things day in and day out that may be pertinent to the job, may not be. And it's just that opportunity to talk to someone that at least understands what we're going through on the job may certainly be relevant to what we're going through in life. So it's not just, when you talk about this peer support, it's not just critical incident stresses. It's not just the stresses of the job, but it's just that person to talk to through life.
What goes on in the job is always directly relatable to what's going on off the job. 100% of the time. If I'm happy out of the job, I'm going to be happier on the job. If I got stress outside the job, I'm going to be higher stressed on the job. You're exactly right.
Well, Jimmy, I think that's a great place to wrap up the conversation. I really appreciate you joining us again. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. And thank you again for being here.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
And I want to thank you for listening to the program and for your interest in VFIS safety resources. I want to thank our guest, Jimmy Fannin, once again for his time and information. Please consider subscribing to our program to stay up to date on new content releases. Also, if you like what you've heard, please consider leaving a review below. For more information about the many resources available from VFIS, please visit VFIS.com. And to submit ideas for future discussions, please reach out by email at VFISriskcontrol@VFIS.com. Thanks, everyone, and have a great day. The views, information, or opinions expressed during this program are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent those of Gladfelter Insurance Group, VFIS, and its employees. Additionally, all views, information, or opinions expressed are provided for informational purposes only and should not be construed as legal, medical, or other professional advice on any subject matter.